Welcome to Leadership Matters. My name's Glenn Price and I'm joined by my business partner Terry Reynolds, and this is a podcast series created by Leadership Consulting to help leaders take their vision and deliver results. And before we start on this particular episode all around experience, I just wanted to create some signposts, I guess, in terms of the journey that we've been on so far. So in our previous 3 podcasts, we've talked about that first big step of 4, which is called set direction. And set direction has 3 specific drivers in it. The first is vision. Once you've got an inspiring vision, the next is strategy. How do you get there? A plan that adds value. And then last of all, alignment. How do you make sure that not only your leaders, but the entire organization is aligned to the strategy to get to the vision? And all 3 of those components we defined, and when we did the research, and in the book, it explores that these are rational components. And the reason why I'm signposting this before we dive into this particular podcast is now we take a second step. So the second step we call engage and excite. This has 3 drivers that specifically are more the emotional side, that balance between rational and emotional that we talked about in the introduction. And the first of those 3 drivers we call experience. Now in the Vision to Results book, we say the line, people don't work for companies, they work for experiences. And I think for years, and definitely our experience when we sold our business across to T, is that we learned that customers obsess over the customer experience. It's reported on, it's discussed, yet we completely overlook the employee experience that produces it.
Yeah, look, I think this is a really, really interesting step because it's one of those ones that is often neglected. Customer experience really is a mirror of employee experience. You know, you can't have one without the other if you like. And I think that, it's very, very difficult for organisations to deliver, care for people, warmth, excellence to customers if the internal experience of their people is quite cold and, I guess fragmented and uninspiring. It's not a great place to work.
It's not a great place to work. It feels a little bit like there's friction or there's sandpaper there, right? I mean, we want great places to work, but this is almost more powerful than this. This is where we're focusing on execution. And my belief, Terry, is that execution lives or dies by, as you said, how it feels at work and what it feels like to be around the people at work and the work that you're doing. And what freaks me out about that is that when we were doing the research, we saw it time and time again. People don't give their best when they're in bad experiences or poor experiences. What they'll give you is compliance. And that's a whole different topic to discuss.
That love of when you get a good customer experience, and to be honest, it's few and far between in regards to organisations. Particularly in Australia, you don't walk in every place and go, wow, that was a great experience. But you do remember the good ones. The people just seem so into their brand. What you and I have only recently had an example of this with a client we were working with. We went into one of their stores. Amazing experience. The guy just lived the brand. He was so into it. We walked out warm with handfuls of stuff we had bought, but we could tell that he was just so engaged in that particular brand, and that came across with the way that he talked to us.
Well, there's that formula, isn't it? I think Sears was the first one to do a study that can actually put some percentages around this. But if we want to have a great customer experience, and my belief is that customers that come, whether it be store or whether it be an internal customer, often, is that they're comparing you against the best customer experience they've ever had without telling you what that is. So we don't find that retail stores, you compare against another retail store. You could be comparing against a flight that you took or changing your health insurance or how you looked after by a bank. It's sitting in your head going, that's my level of great customer experience. What we do know, back to that individual in the store, is that great customer experience are driven by employee experience, and employee experience is driven by leader experience or leadership behaviour. And so my question to you is, what does a leader's everyday behaviour say about the experience of working in their organisation?
Tells us a lot, doesn't it? Sometimes the experience that you have is a sales tool for people walking out going, I love to work for that organisation. It tells you a lot about what that culture is like, how well the people are treated. It all comes up through the way that they interact with you in wherever you actually are, wherever you have that experience.
It's interesting that you say that, it's quite infectious, right?
Mm.
And I think quite incestuous at times, that you know what the culture's like. People now go on to Glassdoor. They're able to talk to people and reach out to people on social media that have worked at that organization before. So it gives a little bit of a window as to the emotional environment of the work, right? Am I going to fit in there is one, but am I going to thrive inside that? And I often think that organizations are they're either talent magnifiers, meaning they develop people really well, and that shows up in their career pathway and success, or they're talent attractors, right? So the culture and experience that's been created by the leadership team is attracting the right sorts of talent. A-grade basketball players like playing with A-grade basketball
Lifts your
players,
game, doesn't it?
right? Can you demand excellence while you're creating that positive, empowering experience, or does tension always come with the territory? Because part of that experience is going, this is what we expect here, right? There's a balance between this is a great place to work and we have high performance standards.
Look, I think you can, if it's a great place to work, you almost have a right to demand high performance, and that is that the external environment has been set for you to give your best. We've all worked in places where we want to do well, but the environment doesn't support that. It could be stepping outside of the cultural norm or whatever it is. I just wonder, does pay have something to do with that? And I think some people, not all, but some people will stay for a while for pay, but other people will stay in organisations because of how that makes them feel. And as what is it, Drive, the book Drive, he talks a lot about going, take pay off the table, pay people enough to take it off the table, etc. So they're not focused on it. It's more to do with the experience of being inside that organisation that goes, you know what, maybe I'm not paid as high as I could be, but I'm okay here because I'm getting supported by the leadership team. They're giving me autonomy, and the things that I'm looking for probably drive that performance.
That's really powerful what you said, because I'm linking all of these components that you're discussing back to the leadership behaviour. And I'm not necessarily saying the leadership team now. I think the experience is created by your first level leader, whatever they demonstrate themselves or whatever they ignore or whatever they emphasize. And you're right, in Drive by Dan Pink, he talks about that importance of autonomy that you've touched on. He also talks about the importance of purpose. Now, purpose links back to podcast 1 where we talked about vision. It's a component of vision. And so how do you create these great experiences? Put pay to one side, put building space and environment to one side, put technology to one side. And maybe that area of giving people a purpose and then getting out of their way and allowing them to produce great work, i.e. autonomy, is the experience that we're looking for. When we talk and we measure customer experience and we do journey maps or we do in-store flow and all of those sorts of things, an exercise I love to ask is what do you expect when I'm talking with a real customer? What do you expect from this experience? And they often say things like, I want it personalized. I want to feel like the person's talking directly to me, that it's private. I want it to be seamless and frictionless. I want the service to be there when I need it, but not all the time, right? So you're not bugged by it. And I can't help but think that the employee experience, going back to that gentleman in that store, I wonder how his leader has given him the same components. Did his leader make his leadership behaviour and development personalised? Did he feel like he was the only one in the room? Was the person genuinely interested in their career path? Were they there when needed, but not all the time, right? Because you're right, experience is definitely a retention tool. And what makes top performers stay, as Dan says in his book, is not normally the pay and the perks. That has to be there as a hygiene factor, but it's how work feels. Why do you think senior teams just keep missing that? Because this is an area where, when we did the research, they're skipping the experience step completely.
When you come back to the model, I think that people, and I am generalising when I say this, that it's easy to focus on those rational components. What we're talking about here is all of a sudden this emotional component. And I think that most leaders, many, many leaders, are more to do with, we've got a strategy, we've got a vision, let's execute on that, as opposed to what some people might consider to be more the fluffy stuff and find out about how people feel. Employees, or organisations, I should say, often will do, we'll do an employee engagement survey, and that'll give us an idea or some feedback about how happy people are in the service. But we all know about the faults of employee surveys or engagement surveys that sometimes don't really tell us really what's under the hood and what's really going on. I think it's very much a personalised thing for the execs, for the leaders to get down, talk to people, involved, be engaging with them, be on hand, help them, guide them, all of those types of things. That takes time. What does that take you away from doing? And I think that, leaders will just weigh up the option of going, actually, it's just easier to execute than it is to get involved with the side of people.
Well, that two things come to mind. The first is the three hats that we all wear, right? The leadership hat, the management hat, and the coaching hat. And it would seem to me as if we over-index the manager hat. And if we haven't been able to push down the work, then we don't have time to do the leadership piece or the development piece in coaching. The second thing that comes to mind is that if the leader is uncomfortable in more of the emotional component, right, which I totally understand. I think that's probably human. It's probably natural. But I believe that there's a direct connection between the leader's mood and their presence, their gravitas, their connection themselves. And I think that directly shapes the experience that other people have. We've all sat on a floor, the boss hops out of the lift, and all of a sudden there's a tenseness that comes in, or there's almost a beat of momentum that starts because the leader is on the floor and she or he or they are going to be able to connect with us. And that's seen as quite a powerful thing, as opposed to, oh my God, head down, headphones on, where do we need to go? Do you think most leaders even know the vibe that they're creating when they reach out?
I think there's definitely, I've seen and worked with some that do. I think but they are probably few and far between. I think that the majority of them don't really appreciate or understand the impact that their mood, the way they come across, impacts others. But you'll also get team members that just put their head down and go, you know what, I'm just not going to engage with that. I'm just going to keep on going. I've got my own things to do. I'm not going to allow that to impact the way that I am. So, there is definitely, twos and fro's around, some leaders are aware, some are not aware.
Look, the reason why this is the fourth step in the driver's model is that it's so important to almost curate, like a designer, deliberately curate these moments, not only for customers, but also to understand that link between employees and customers. And you can't just be chasing one in your strategy. You need to understand that when you execute on that strategy, it's going to impact both employee experience and customer experience. So here are some top tips for leaders on how to design great experiences. Number one, audit your shadow, right? Like constantly be asking, what's it like to be on the end or the receiving end of me? The answer will teach you more than any engagement survey, like you said before. I think number two, engineer moments that matter. And that's hard because different people, different strokes, different parts of the organization. But identify the key touch points in the employee's journey, whether it's onboarding, feedback, recognition, reboarding you often talk about, and elevate those moments deliberately, and they're leadership exposure moments where you're able to reach down and connect. And talking about connect, number three, connect experience to results. So I think when we did the original research, Terry, we saw this visible line between how people feel and what the business achieves. It's just there. And so often it's not said, it's just felt. We need to make sure that that's more overtly brought up in the strategy narrative and when we're celebrating progress like we talked about in the strategy podcast. And last of all, I think listen for energy, not just opinion. We believe pulse checks and engagement scores miss the nuance that's actually happening in the experience. And so we need to pay attention to tone and to body language and to silence in the room and become really attuned and help leaders have the tools for them to be really connecting into the bit that's not said, but the bit that people feel, right? So we always end with a provocation. Today's one is, if your people rated the daily experience of working with you out of 10, what score would you earn? What would you like it to be? What are you going to do differently tomorrow to try and move that score?